I see you've made your decision. Now let's see you enforce it. The Crow stars Brandon Lee and is directed by Alex Proyas. Every film lover has that 1, 2, maybe 3 movies in their lifetime that really touch them on an emotional level, that dig a little deeper than most movies do. And The Crow is that movie for me. I have been obsessed with this movie really since I saw it in the theater opening night in May of 1994. A lot of my young viewers are probably jealous of me right now because it was a phenomenal experience. So this is going to be a tough review for me to do because this movie has such an attachment with me. It's going to be more of a remembrance aside from a review. So first I'm going to share a little bit of my personal experience with The Crow. I remember back in '92 I saw Rapid Fire. I remember it was marketed as the son of Bruce Lee, and I was intrigued because I'm a big Bruce Lee fan, and so I wanted to see what this movie had to offer. And Rapid Fire is not a perfect movie, but I thought Brandon Lee did a very good job in it, and he was very charismatic. So a couple months later, I'm going to get my breakfast, start my normal day, and I look at the paper and it says actor killed on set of an action movie, and it was Brandon Lee. And I remember I was just kind of shocked. It felt eerie because also Bruce Lee had died at a pretty young age in an unconventional way. And then later I heard that the movie that Brandon died on was called The Crow, and it was about a guy who comes back from the grave to avenge the death of himself and his fiancée. And I thought, wow, how eerie. You have a guy that's playing a dead character and he died on the set of that movie in real life. And what's even more crazy is Brandon Lee was going to get married 2 weeks after he died, and the character Eric Draven was about to get married. So I remember for months and months and months I was so intrigued about this movie because nobody thought it was actually going to be released. You know, there was still a lot of footage of Brandon to be shot, but eventually it did get released, and I remember going to see this in the theater and just being completely immersed in this movie, this experience. I just loved every second of it. It was so different. It was so unique. It touched me on such a level. And there was also this complete undercurrent throughout the movie because Brandon Lee was not with us anymore. So I just felt a sadness throughout the movie. And I just remember that last frame before the credits roll, and it says, "For Brandon and Eliza." And I just remember a chill went down my spine and I just felt sadness. And I remember sitting in the theater and everybody in the theater was completely silent and nobody got up during the credits until maybe midway through. And it was kind of a beautiful moment. So now let's get into the review. Let me tell you why The Crow is such an amazing movie. First off, The Crow is and was so original. The only movie that looked kind of similar to it was probably Tim Burton's Batman, but Batman really had more of a comedic undertone to it, whereas The Crow, there was nothing funny about it whatsoever. This was a completely serious revenge story. And I just love the cinematography of this movie. It's almost a black and white film. I mean, I'd say most of the movie, probably 75–90% of the movie is black and white. Not in your traditional black and white sense, but it could be a black and white movie. And I think that really fits the tone of the movie because Eric Draven himself in this movie is a black and white type character. There's no gray area with him whatsoever. He is there on a mission and he just wants to avenge the death of himself and his fiancée. And throughout the movie, Eric runs into people from his life that, weren't the killers. And really in those scenes, these people are kind of in Eric's way. He doesn't really want to see these people. He's not there for them. He's there for vengeance, and then he just wants to go back to the grave. Throughout this movie, it's also raining quite a bit, and the rain really adds to the atmosphere. I mean, Eric even says it can't rain all the time because Sarah is complaining about the rain. Also, I love all the villains in this movie. These are truly almost evil people. Every October 30th, which is referred to as Devil's Night, their sole mission is to set the city on fire. That's what they want to do. They are drug addicts, they are thugs. All they really do is just wreak havoc. And I also like how every villain has their own unique characteristic about them. One of them is really good with knives. One of them, he likes to use dynamite and explosions. And they're all really just left of center. They are kind of out of their minds. And just on a side note, poor Michael Massee. Michael Massee played Fun Boy, and he was the guy holding the gun that shot and killed Brandon Lee. Now, it's not his fault whatsoever because he didn't know this terrible tragedy was about to happen. And still to this day, Michael Massee will not watch The Crow for obvious reasons. And it took him a whole year to even be able to act again. But the one villain that I like the most is Top Dollar, played by Michael Wincott. I loved his character because he wasn't directly involved with the raping and killing of Eric and Shelley, but he was kind of the kingpin of the whole thing, and he is really just emotionless. He even tells Eric at the end of the movie, hey, it's nothing personal, but this is business and you were in the way. And he almost admires Eric's tenacity in the movie. And I just love that final scene with him and Eric on the roof, that final showdown, and the way it all played out. How Eric transfers all the pain and anguish that he has been building up inside, and he just transfers it all to Top Dollar. He tells him, I have something I want to give you, I don't want it anymore. And that's his way of letting go, really, of all this emotion that he has felt. Because when you think about it, this is a guy that was killed in a brutal way, and before he's killed, he has to watch his fiancée be raped repeatedly. Also, I want to talk about writer James O'Barr. The story of The Crow really came about by accident because James O'Barr was engaged to be married and his wife was killed in a car accident. And out of that anguish and pain that he felt, he wrote the story of The Crow. And I think that's part of why the story is so unique. It's not your traditional superhero story. This is a story of pain and anguish. This is not a story that could be PG-13. This is something that has to be rated R because, you know, in the end, it's not going to be the greatest of endings. Even if Eric completes his mission, still 2 people are lying in a grave. And finally, I have to talk about Brandon Lee. His performance in The Crow is really just groundbreaking, and it's one of the most underrated performances I think I've ever seen. And it's been copied time and time again. Some might even say Heath Ledger's The Joker borrows almost heavily from The Crow. Not taking anything away from Heath Ledger, his performance as the Joker is one of the greatest performances in cinema history, really. But Brandon Lee's performance really kind of paved the way for that type of performance. I mean, the characters even look eerily similar. But I often think about what would Brandon Lee's career be like. It's a tragedy, really. There have been roles that have popped up here and there since his death, especially ones like The Matrix. I remember watching The Matrix in the theater and immediately thinking, wow, Brandon Lee would have been great as this role as Neo. Not taking anything away from Keanu Reeves, who did a great job as Neo, but I think Brandon Lee would have been just as good, if not better. And still to this day, I think of different roles that, wow, Brandon Lee would have been great in this. But one of the scenes I love so much in The Crow is the first scene with Tintin. You see Brandon Lee running on the rooftops, and then he falls into the trash can, and he lets out this really eerie laugh. And it really sets the tone of this character that he is not all there. He is crazy and he wants vengeance. And I just love the scene of him stepping out of the trash can and walking towards Tintin. And he looks like a man on a mission. You can tell that Brandon Lee really just ate up every scene in The Crow. This is the role that he had been waiting for. You know, he had been fighting his way up through the Hollywood ranks for a few years, and he was typecast in all these martial arts roles, and then finally this role comes along that is just so breathtaking and so refreshing. And still to this day, it's one of the most unique roles in action film history, in any kind of film history, really. And the one good thing you can take out of this is Brandon Lee really left a legacy in his role as Eric Draven in The Crow. Rest in peace, Brandon Lee. So guys, obviously, The Crow is a Trapped on an Island movie. if there was a rating higher than Trapped on an Island, I would give it to The Crow. That's how much I love this film. This film is just so groundbreaking to me. And also, quickly before I go, I gotta mention the soundtrack. The soundtrack to The Crow is so unique, and it's one of the best soundtracks I think I've ever heard. And I remember buying the soundtrack when it first came out, and just about all the artists were unheard of at the time, except for maybe Stone Temple Pilots. The soundtrack is the perfect companion to the movie, and all the songs are strategically placed in a specific scene. You can tell that this was a soundtrack that was well prepared and well planned out. And I remember reading somewhere that Alex Proyas, he showed Brandon Lee the soundtrack, and Brandon Lee was really just ecstatic about the music that was going to be in this movie. And as a tribute to The Crow, I recently recorded a drum cover with Tim from the Late Reviews for one of the tracks on the soundtrack. And Tim provided all the guitar work. And we're currently working on that right now, and once it's all finished, I will have a card in this review so you guys can click on it. But I'm really looking forward to you guys seeing that. So anyway, guys, that is my review for The Crow. What are your thoughts on this movie? The Crow is really the ultimate definition of a cult classic. There are fans that are just so obsessed with this movie. It's really more of a lifestyle than it is an actual movie. I mean, every Halloween, you still see people dressing up as Eric Draven from The Crow. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and it can't rain all the time.